If your focus only turns on when something is interesting and not when it's important, then this episode is going to change how you work. We're not talking about mindset or motivation. I'm talking about design. Because if you've been trying to force productivity by prioritizing what should matter and quietly wondering why your brain won't cooperate, then I got news for you. Your problem likely isn't discipline, it's architecture. Stick around, and I'm going to share how the top 1% use work life design that matches their neurobiology for greater success and sustainable impact. This is Jagged Brilliance, the show for ambitious founders, leaders, and twice exceptional minds who don't fit in neat boxes. Here, we break down what actually holds high potential people back. Things like invisible burnout, mislabelled sensitivity, and systems built for average. Here, you learn how to turn your uneven edges into strategic advantage and build sustainable impact without burning yourself out. Let's dive in. There's a particular kind of human who shows up again and again in high potential circles. Someone who can solve $1 million strategic problem almost effortlessly, who can see the flaw in a business model or the gap in a market or the next move before anyone else has even had a chance to catch up. And yet, that same person can spend weeks staring at a 3-sentence email, opening it, closing it, rewriting it in their head, and never quite hitting send. And this isn't rare, actually. It's not random. The pattern shows up most clearly in leadership groups and what we call the twice exceptional. Twice exceptional, or 2E, describes people who are gifted in one or more domains, intellectually, strategically, creatively, or all three, while also navigating cognitive, social, or emotional differences associated with a neurodivergent profile. That might be ADHD, autism, dyslexia, OCD, or a combination that often doesn't really fit one single label. The important thing to understand is this: these capabilities coexist, which means the same nervous system that enables extraordinary insight, pattern recognition, or originality can also struggle with initiation, sequencing, or low stimulation tasks. And that unevenness isn't incidental. And it's also not the minority. A recent study showed that almost half of leaders identify as neurodivergent. Today, I'm going to give you the work-life design protocol that they use to get to and stay at the top of their game, so you can too. For context, let's take a look at the roadmap that you've probably been trying to follow. Because for the past 50 years, we've designed work around a very specific nervous system profile. Someone whose brain responds reliably to importance, as the world sees and defines it, long-term consequences, delayed rewards, and kind of abstract outcomes. And that design profile is what productivity advice and rah-rah motivational theory quietly assumes. If it matters enough, you'll do it. If the stakes are high enough, you'll focus. And if you care, your brain will switch on. And when it doesn't, that you'll white-knuckle your way through with sheer willpower. Well, I hate to break it to you, but from a neurobiological perspective, those assumptions only hold for a subset of people. And if you're listening to this, then chances are that you're not one of them. You're in good company because neither am I. I'm Mariane Power, behavioural scientist, neuroinclusive system strategist, and former clinical psychologist. For over 17 years, I conducted neurodevelopmental assessments in the clinic while also coaching elite performers across the sports and the arts, and working inside boardrooms, supporting systems designed to build healthy, innovative teams that delivered sustainable, measurable results. All the while, I was describing the same pattern that we were talking about now, experiencing my own moments of extraordinary insight and hyper-focused energy, paired with persistent friction in places of my business and life that were supposed to be easy. At 38, I received a diagnosis of ADHD combined type, and that reframed my entire experience. And not only that, but the quiet struggles that I'd been seeing for years in high capability leaders trying to close the gap between their potential and performance. When I went looking for answers to close that gap and move more intentionally and strategically towards flourishing, a different gap emerged. And this time, it was in the research. You see, we understood twice exceptionality in the classrooms, but not in the boardrooms, not in startups, and not backstage behind the curtains with our world's wildest performers. So I started mapping high variance neurobiology to the real pressure points of leadership and creative work. And that's what today's episode is about. Understanding what actually activates a brain like yours so that you can design for it. First, here's the motivation mindset myth that we need to shift. Focus is not a personality trait. And depending on your own neurobiology, it's not something you can force, at least not indefinitely. Focus is a nervous system state. So when it comes to motivation, instead of asking, why can't I just do this? The question high-performing neurodivergent leaders ask is this: what conditions does my nervous system require in order to get going and lock in? Neuroscience and psychology sciences have been pointing to this distinction for a very long time. Some nervous systems activate in response to importance, deadlines, consequence, long-term outcomes. And that's the model that most modern work is still built around. But for many twice exceptional people, importance alone, defined by somebody else, doesn't do much at all. They can logically understand that something matters, but that doesn't mean that their system is going to engage. What does bring and keeps them online is interest. So much so that researchers like Dr. William Dodson have gone on to define, study, and build evidence-based protocol for neurodivergent people that he describes as having an interest-based nervous system. In practical terms, that means that your brain needs a stronger or more specific signal around the things that matter to you, often right here and right now, so that it will come online. That signal might be interest or novelty or a challenge, and sometimes it's urgency. And often something that's emotionally charged, something that lights you up or pisses you off and gets your big, raw and vibrant imagination and body activated. Then, when one or ideally more of those elements are present, what shows up isn't just focus. We can kick into overdrive and bring hyperfocus. Time compresses, distractions fall away, and the work pulls you in. And you don't try to concentrate here. This isn't willpower in action then. Concentration just happens naturally. But when those elements are absent, the opposite is also true. No amount of grungy grit will reliably get you where others say you need to go, leaving your productivity at an unpredictable pace. This is where a lot of the unnecessary shame creeps in, because from the outside, this pattern looks like inconsistency. And while at first it might seem easy and logical for you to name it that way too, if you dig a little deeper on the inside, what you'll probably feel is something more like friction. And over time, that friction gets mislabeled both by ourselves and by others too, like procrastination, avoidance, or a lack of follow-through. But neurologically, something else is actually happening. For someone with a spiky profile, shifting from a high-interest, high-challenge task to a low-interest, low-stimulation one isn't a simple pivot. It takes a full system reset. And that reset costs energy before the work even begins. So by the time you sit down to just send the email, your nervous system is already running on empty. This also explains why urgency works until it doesn't. Deadlines can spike activation, yes, and pressure can absolutely force engagement, but urgency on its own isn't fuel, it's a stress response. And when stress becomes the primary way we get work done, it can come with a real cost. So what I want you to remember is this: urgency borrows energy from tomorrow, whereas interest generates it. Let me make this tangible. I worked with a brilliant founder, brilliant product vision, and about to step into their second capital raise, so proven. She came to me convinced that she was self-sabotaging because she hadn't replied to investor emails in over 2 weeks. Her co-founder was beside themselves, assuming that she didn't care, but she knew she did. It's just that her body and her brain weren't clocking the stakes. Her nervous system treated anything to do with a status update as just neutral, flat, invisible. So when we mapped her activation patterns, the contrast was actually really obvious. She could write a 15-page vision document in a single afternoon. Like, I have never seen anything like it before. Total energy and total flow. High challenge, high novelty, high interest. But the 3-sentence email had none of those signals. And this wasn't the first time she'd seen this pattern play out, often at the cost of the relationships within her team. So we didn't talk about discipline. That was irrelevant. We redesigned the architecture. She switched from written emails to short Loom videos, and she batched them at a time of day when her energy naturally peaked. And she reframed updates as narrative checkpoints so that they weren't just administrative chores. The email problem disappeared. Not because she changed, nothing in her brain was any different, but the system that she used finally matched her nervous system. So this is the pivot that I want you to make. Stop asking, why can't I force myself to do this? And start asking, what would make this task irresistible for my brain? And to help you out, and because my own brain finds a catchy little framework irresistible itself, here's my 4 Rs of Neuroinclusive Performance architecture that you can use to turn this into action. First, recognize. Stop tracking time and start tracking fuel. Notice which tasks you initiate easily, which ones trigger resistance or paralysis, and which ones drain you far more than they should. When that shame spiral or inner critic chatter creeps in, remember, this isn't about you judging you. This is about you getting curious. You're just mapping. This will give you the data about how your nervous system and brain actually works, not how it's expected to. Second, redesign. Once you know what activates you, redesign unavoidable tasks to include at least one activation signal. I want you to add a challenge or a novelty, change the format, and change up your environment. If a task is repetitive and it's low interest, there's no lesson in suffering through it. Design around it. This is where you design support into the system, tools, automation, or the people so that your energy goes where it matters the most and so your brilliance can shine. Third, resource. This is about how you hold the work, not how you change it. High variance intelligence doesn't need to rely on everything staying in your head. It works best when some of the load lives outside of your brain. So instead of pushing yourself to remember, track, and initiate everything internally, you spread the weight. That might look like a visual board that you can actually see, or working alongside someone so that that momentum kicks in with company. Scheduling work around your real energy and not the clock, at least not by society's standards. Or setting up cues that your environment starts to feel easier. And if you find that the planning or that part is hard to do, outsource that too. To a colleague whose strengths complement yours, to a coach, or to a mastermind group who can help you spot your blind spots, fill in the gaps, and stay on track. Finally, release. This is possibly the hardest part. Release the belief that you should be able to focus on what's important. Every time you try to perform against a standard that your nervous system can't actually meet, you're paying a masking tax. And that tax, it can show up as fatigue, self-doubt, overcompensation, and eventually burnout. When people with interest-based nervous systems are given autonomy, activation-aligned work, and environmental control, we don't just cope. Research shows that they outperform, especially in complex, fast-moving environments. Release the standard that was never yours to meet and redirect your energy to building the achievable, desirable, and sustainable workflow that supports the brain behind your business. If your brain runs on interest, trust me, you're not fragile. You are high-spec hardware, operating probably in a low-spec environment. So add some bling and watch your performance soar. Because the future isn't going to be built by you grinding through compliance forever. It's built when you're able to spot those patterns early and when you can pivot as plans shift and when you stay creative, even during times of uncertainty. But that only works if the systems around you support that kind of intelligence rather than quietly wearing you down in the process. So in the week ahead, I want you to try this. Instead of trying to overhaul the whole entire system and fix everything at once, yes, hello, overachieving, recovering perfectionists in the room, I see you. Pick one task that you've been avoiding, something important that keeps sliding. First, Notice what happens in your body when you start to think about starting it. Then change one condition. Add interest, add challenge, change the format, move it to a different time of day. We're not trying to get better at pushing through here. I want you to test what actually activates you, what brings you alive, what locks you in, and what keeps you online. That single experiment is the beginning of creating a sustainable work-life design that actually works for you. Links to supporting resources and the research are in the show notes below. Next episode, we're going to be exploring a quieter struggle, why feedback can feel like a threat, and how to stay strategic when your nervous system goes into overdrive. I'm Mariane Power, and this is Jagged Brilliance. Let's redesign systems that don't break the people inside them and instead help us to thrive.